This Acrivia training video is focusing on the cash book presentation or bank reconciliation, but is entirely focused on the loading of a bank file which has been downloaded from your banking software and using that as the driver for the reconciliation process. There is another video that covers this screen, the cash book presentation screen in its entirety, with the exclusion of the load. Hence this video being entirely focused on that and the efficiency gains and benefits of using your bank file to do your cash book presentation in the Acrivia system. To start with, we'll put in the statement date representing the last transaction that you've downloaded in your bank file. So in our example today, that's the 8th of August 22, we can see on the top of the screen we've reconciled until the end of July. And at this stage, you can clearly see we've got two transactions in the system, not presented yet from the previous presentation run, and we've got an opening balance up the top. We press load, we choose the bank file from the location that we saved it when we downloaded it. And at this point, we hand the control of the entire process over to a new form, the bank statement import form. So the cash book presentation screen is still kind of happening behind the scenes, and it's being driven effectively by what we're now going to do through this actual form that's come to the front. To cover a higher level overview before we get into the details, there's 4 tabs of key interest up the top here. The first tab shows us any transactions in the bank file that have already been matched off against the transaction in the Acrivia system. That's possible because when we did the transaction, we've already posted it. We haven't waited until the bank file was downloaded to do the process. We've actually been able to put it in advance. That might be standing journals, it could be creditor payments. There's a number of ways that that could have been entered in already, including debtor receipting, which we're going to talk about shortly. The Assign tab gives us the ability, using the red arrow up here, to assign any transactions from the bank file against the transactions already in the Acrivia system. More than likely, those that can be done will already have been done and will appear on the Matched tab, but if Acrivia can't reconcile the two with confidence, it will leave it, allowing you to choose a transaction to match up in the Acrivia data and then use the red arrow here to allocate. I've actually got none in this example, quite deliberately, and we won't be doing that until we come back to the end of the process where I've quite deliberately left a creditor payment out of the Acrivia data to show how that should be handled. The next part of the process is the debtor receipting, and this allows us to post all the debtor receipts using the bank file information as the driver for the amount we have received in our bank account, and that process then automates the Acrivia debtor receipting screen, the entry of the amount, the entry of the date, and the reconciling back to the invoices that have been paid. And we'll cover that in full detail shortly. And then lastly, after we've done all of what we can do, the leftover transactions need to be journaled into the system. And again, we could go through the general ledger batch post or any of the posting screens, and that would then have them appear in the system here on the right. We could then allocate them against the bank file information here on the left using the red arrow. But the faster way is to utilize the system's knowledge that we already know one side is the bank. We just need to know the other side of the journal and whether there's GST implications with that particular journal. So I'm now going to run through all of those processes in full detail. The desire to mention that quickly at the start of this video is for anyone who's time poor but wondering how the system works. That's an overview, and there is serious time advantages in using the bank file, because even when we've got to put transactions into the system, be they debtor receipts, general ledger journals, we have the ability for the system to do most of the posting work and for us to sort of drive the final outcome, which is obviously faster than doing each of those manually. So now let's just run through each of those steps again, but in full detail. As I mentioned, anywhere the system can allocate the transaction that's appeared on the bank file with the transaction that was already in the Acrivia system, it will do so. And you can see in our example data, we have in fact got a vehicle finance, standing journal, it's occurring, it's been posted, and we've had the system automatically allocate that one, and it's appeared here on the Matched tab. There are no transactions that I can now manually assign from the bank file to the Acrivia data that's already there. This one transaction that's there is in fact a future transaction that'll be on the next bank statement. It's an EFT payment to an electronics company, and it's on the 10th of August. Our cut-off date for our file was actually the 8th of August, so it's an unpresented transaction at the end of this process. Bringing us to the first posting action that we're going to take, and that is, let's pick up all the debtor receipts, all the payments that we've received as direct postings into our account from our customers, our debtors, and rather than having to go through and manually post each of those through the debtor receipting screen first, let's show how that can be achieved through the bank statement import process. This tab has already been set up. There is in fact a tab that allows us to set the matching rules beyond the scope of this video. As a rule, we'll set this up for you and it will be configured to work correctly with your bank account. Obviously, I'm using a sample bank account here of Westpac. And the transaction type in the system is DIRP for direct payment. Auto match runs through all the data on the screen and it identifies the debtor's account from the information that came from the bank file. It can go further than that if there's additional information in that transaction from the bank file, i.e. here we have an invoice number that was clearly captured when this person made a payment, and so the system has identified the transaction in Acrivia for that amount on the cash account. And you can see it's not the total of what's owing. In period 2, our 30-day column, we actually have a greater amount owing, so there's clearly other transactions, but this one's been identified uniquely. And as such, the system says, I am capable of reconciling that transaction at a transaction level, not just at an account level, but specifically against that single transaction. This next line has identified as Rob Ryder's account, and the system's identified that the $5,747.75 exactly matches to what was the statement balance he received from us at the end of the previous month. So that amount will match exactly what's owing in the 30-day column, and as such, the system is capable of creating the posting and reconciling all transactions in that period, in the July period on their account. This third line quite deliberately hasn't been matched because I wanted to show you the process of linking bank file information back to the debtor's account. Come back to that one in just a second. And this last one, again, the system's already done that, identified who it is, and couldn't reconcile the amount paid to any specific amount owing. Why? Because the debtor's made a lump sum payment. There is no dispute around our account. They've just paid $6,000 off effectively their oldest transaction, and they're just paying the account off as they come forwards. We can see they are in fact overdue, back into 90 days in fact. We could choose reconcile to oldest, so that is certainly an option that we could set right now, and then we would have to do no more work with that particular account. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to leave that one on manual post and reconcile. And I want to drill down the process of how we can use this screen to drive the debtor receipting screen, but still leave us in control for the outcome. Before we go back to that one, let's go back to this third one here and talk about linking a debtor's account in the system back to what will be on the banking file in future, assuming some consistency on their part when they make a payment to us. So I can quite clearly see it's going to be this account here, Vic Hand Constructions. I can select that. Because this is the first time I've linked this account as part of this bank rec process, the system's saying, would you like to set up some matching rules in the future? So in the future, if Hand makes a payment, we don't need to re-ask the question. We can simply fill it in like we did for those other ones on this occasion. Yes, I would. And the simple way to look at this is give the system as much information as we can, probably no more, but as much as we can that would uniquely identify them. So Vic Hand might be a better approach than just the word hand. I'm pretty safe here because I know the system will look for spaces or at the end of characters, etc. If someone else had the letters hand in their account, it still wouldn't pick it up under the matching rules of defined. So I'm just going to go with that, but that wasn't strong enough. Obviously, we can work to more. The key point, though, is the consistency in the way they present that information in future. And if they're kind enough to identify a debtor's account explicitly as it is, then generally that's the right way to go. By choosing this account, you can see now the system said, oh, yep, that's cool. This account payment we've received into our bank account is for the exact amount owing in period 2 and 3. So in 30 days and 60 days, they're a little overdue. And as such, the system's very happy to reconcile. It's here, it's identified period 2, 3, and 4. 4 is in fact 0, so there's no impact there. It's going to pick up all the invoices in the 60-day column and the 30-day column and reconcile them out with the debtor receipt that it would post. These ones are going to happen automatically when we press the post button, and quite clearly I could have 300 entries on this screen. If there's very few manual ones to be done, then the actual receipting process in Akrivia is very quick indeed. So the more the transactions paid matches as to their statement in that previous month, in other words, the greater the clean match up between the funds we're receiving and the amount owing, the more you do no extra work whatsoever. The system will just do the whole thing. For the video, I want to do one manually and show you how that process works. So I'm going to select this line here. I could press the manual reconcile button or I can double click, same difference. And then Akrivia will open up the debtor receiving screen. It will select the debtor's account. It will enter the date and the amount of the payment, all on that first tab. So essentially all of this information here has been done. Press reconcile and throw me the control to say, how would you like to allocate it? And why is it doing that? Because that was the option we chose. We said we would like to manually handle the reconciliation process. So you can already see that's actually faster than debtor, receipt, find the account, etc., because the system's driving it forwards from the bank file information. Here, standard process, and there is a training video for this. Auto rec simply pays the oldest off through to the youngest. When the money runs out, it stops the allocation. So we've partially paid that third invoice. And if we had a look at the way the allocation went in terms of the lines on the invoice, we can see we've partially paid the first line. I press post. When that's complete, it will advise in terms of success. You pretty much shouldn't see any other message come up there as a rule, leaving me with what's left to still be done, but all of these ones can be done by the system entirely and completely. So here I can simply press the post button. Clearly I could have gone the other way around if I chose, and some people do that. Some people use the post immediately. The system will run through and all the ones it can, and then what's left on the screen are all the manual ones you need to deal with. Same end result. Everything's been processed. If we now go back and have a look at the matched tab, the information on this tab is starting to grow. All of these debtor receipts have now been posted as part of this bank rec process using the bank file as the driver for the information, both amounts and the accounts involved. The assigned list here, what's left in our bank statement, is starting to shrink because the other ones have already been done. And obviously what's left to still be posted in, should they be GL journals, that list is also shrinking. I still at this stage cannot reconcile anything from the bank file to Akrivia because we haven't got anything to work with. But as we look down this list, I can see that this is a creditor payment. Now, under normal circumstances, you'd like to think that creditor payments had been processed as they were done, but on this occasion that hasn't occurred. We've made a $2,500 payment to CTL Building Supplies. A little like our debtor example, we've just done a bulk payment. We haven't actually specifically paid anything off necessarily. Let's go and have a look at that. But the point I want to make is that's a creditor transaction, and all creditor transactions should be put through the creditor's system so that our bank rec is kept in order. It's not a GL journal, it clearly belongs to the creditors. So creditor payment screen is involved here. I'll find the account in question. It's letting me know that there's other credits or payments that haven't been allocated to invoices. Would I like to deal with that before I go ahead? On this occasion, I'll say no for the sake of the training video. The date goes in up here. EFT is my reference. And as per the bank amount, I made an EFT payment of $2,500. So I'm not going to get a lot of wriggle room there. I have to allocate back to what the bank's already aware of. And again, I'm just going to simply allocate based on oldest using the auto rec button. And we can see there, as our debtor did to us, we've done to somebody else in my training example, we're partially paying that fourth invoice in the list. I press post, that's complete. And at this point back on this screen, I can press the refresh and it will sweep in any transactions that have occurred through my actions or anyone else on the network into my screen here. So now I've actually got this EFT appearing. I can double click on the amount, it will select it. That's not a difficult thing to find when there's only a few transactions, but if you can imagine there was a great number of transactions in this screen, we might be doing our bank rec process monthly as opposed to weekly or daily, then double clicking on the amount can be quite effective to finding it. There's also find buttons down here, so I could put in a partial reference, I could search in an amount column, I can click anywhere to use those find, all that sort of thing that you've seen in other previous screens. Once I've squared these two off, I press the red button here to allocate. So I'm allocating what's in the bank file back to what's already in Acrivia. They disappear, both of those off this screen. They're now on the matched screen, so the system's quite happily connected those two off together, taking me back to my assign, and now I'm left with only transactions that need to be posted. And as it turns out, all of these are GL journals for the sake of my video. Bob's stationery purchase here could have been done as a creditor invoice on the cash account, or you might have an account for Bob. I'm deliberately choosing to do this as a GL journal to show you the GST take up as part of this process. So our fourth tab here, the Add tab, is where we add a GL journal, or we add transactions into the system that are going to be seen as a GL journal, driven from the cash book presentation process. So clearly, Acrivia already knows the credit or debit nature. Each of these are a credit to my bank account, but it doesn't know the other side, and that's where the screen here requires the operator's input to basically achieve an outcome. I could choose a different entity on a line-by-line basis by setting it. If there's a consistency, and sometimes people have an admin entity in their system, sometimes people only have one entity in their system, so that will automatically fill if there's just the one, but otherwise I can use the company button here to fill that in. And now I need to tell the system what is the GL account that goes with each of these. So this is bank fees. If you know the account number, you don't have to search for it. Double click and search. You could simply key it in. So I could have keyed in 309 there. If you don't, as you can see, you can double click and choose it. So if I knew what the company Visa account was, I could simply key that in, and that will identify it. If it's invalid, it'll pop up and make me select anyway. There's no GST on this one. This one is the account where we've used the company credit card to pay the invoices. We've already taken the GST up on the invoices, so this is simply clearing the liability in my balance sheet as I've paid the Visa from the bank account. Here we have a BAS payment to the ATO. Again, if I know the account number, I can type it in. If I didn't, I could search in all the normal ways. My BAS accrual account for clearing. And this last one, of slightly more interest in the training video sense, represents stationery purchases. I'm going to choose to put it through as a GL journal because I can. Printing and stationery, I think, was the account here. Printing, stationery and postage has been grouped together. And this actual transaction does have GST. So I can double click and that will take 1/11 of the withdrawal amount. If it gets complicated, you can obviously overtype that. So if I went to Coles and I purchased milk as well as purchasing other office consumables that had GST involved, the GST won't be neatly 1/11. I could actually put that in as an entry by the lesser amount by overriding it. The bottom line being, again, for the sake of this training video, you're in control and you need to ensure that the correct outcomes are there. If it was a highly complicated situation, probably you would be better off doing a general ledger batch post and doing as many transactional elements to that as was appropriate, and or processing it through the creditor invoicing screen, which, as you know, to be aware, you can put in on a cash account and instantly press the payment button to put the payment through at the same time. So that would be just as effective in a sense, because that would then allow us to press the refresh, see it appear here, and assign it with our red arrow. Again, for the sake of the training video, I've deliberately left one in here that's got GST involved, neat 1/11th. And now I can actually press the update, which is going to go and post a journal, a GL journal, into the system where the credit side is the bank, the debit side is the GL account I've chosen. If there's GST involved, it'll obviously hit the GST payable or GST collected account, depending on the nature of the credit or debit element. It tells me the general ledger journal number that's been done. I do want to point out at this point in time, Acrivia does not support holding open a bank statement process where you're using a bank file. If you didn't use the bank file, then by all means you can close the presentation screen, come back later, open it up and continue on the process. But where you're using the bank file, we drive you to achieve a full outcome at that time. This presents a potential problem in that if you do not know the general ledger allocation account for something that has appeared on the bank and you want to wrap up this process immediately without seeking input from someone else who may have the answer to that question, allocate it to the suspense account and then use the general ledger search screen or the batch screen or any other ways throughout the system to clear the suspense account out to the appropriate expense or income account in due course. But you do have to complete the process through to completion, and you can't suspend it and hold it over in terms of using a bank statement for the process driver. Close that screen. That brings us back to our cash book presentation screen where we started, and press the load button. And you can see here the bank statement closing balance is not white, it's greyed out. I cannot key that in. It's been determined by the bank file. The opening balance is, as it's come in, it's white, but again, you actually can't change it. That's just a highlight in terms of the way we're presenting that data. And the difference here is 0. So all things are in order. The debits and the credits that we've ticked off at the bank statement, including the process of posting some debtor receipts and or posting our general ledger journals, now have the closing balance in the bank matching this screen's closing balance. So we're in a position to apply it, and that then completes that day or that week, whatever the time frame, the presentation of that bank information.